Hello, it's been over a year since my last video, but we're just going to ignore that and jump right on into a new video that I want to talk about, a new book that I want to talk about, which is Shirley Jackson's famous short story, The Lottery. Now, this is probably her best known short story. It is the story of a rural town's yearly lottery, and there's a sinister twist at the end of it. It is an absolute staple of 8th grade English classrooms and American short story anthologies alike. And this story is a masterclass in how to build suspension and worry all throughout the reading experience. But what's weird about The Lottery, and what's also weird about pretty much everything Shirley Jackson writes, is that she often breaks fiction writing conventions that you would think are crucial when it comes to generating satisfying tension for the reader. More specifically, when we're talking about The Lottery, her characters are very one-dimensional, and it leaves you with very little capacity to connect to anyone in any meaningful way. And I would argue that you don't connect to anyone throughout the entire story. It's really just sort of these almost paper dolls that you're just kind of passing by. You don't have any idea of anyone's needs or wants or what they're, looking for out of life. There's no greater story to them. You just get a cursory run through of everyone. And you would think that with such an impersonal way to connect to anything, that you wouldn't care about where the story's going, because typically when you're writing tension, suspense comes from the fact that you care about the characters you're watching and you care about what happens to them to some capacity. You care about seeing them get what they want, or you care about seeing them get hurt if you don't like them, or the point is that you're invested, that you have a stake in this character specifically, as though the character is a real living person. So this begs the question, how come Shirley Jackson is absolutely brilliant at generating tension when you don't care about her characters, specifically in this story? So let's talk about the plot for a moment, for the uninitiated. So basically, the story, as I said, it's a small town. It's a pretty rural town. They're doing their annual lottery in the summer. The town gathers around, they draw names, they pick families, and the winner is someone who pulls out a piece of paper that has a small black dot on it. Mrs. Hutchinson, who's a mother and a wife, her family's the last to come up, and she shows resistance to playing. She doesn't want to play. She's kind of insisting, this isn't right. These aren't the rules. She's the closer they're getting to winning, the more resistance she's showing, which we'll get into analysis later. But in the end, she's the one who picks the paper with the black dot. When she wins, Mr. Summers, who's essentially the town leader, says, "All right, folks, let's finish this quickly." And then the narrator takes a moment to tell readers how the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, but they still remembered to use stones. So earlier in the story, it was mentioned that the boys had gathered some stones, and now everyone is gathering from that pile. The adults are kind of slow-moving, kind of over it. So it's sort of like, when you're on your break at work and you're just kind of reluctantly going back to it. The kids are way more excited about this. They're kind of fast, rambunctious. Mrs. Hutchinson has a young child named Davy. We don't know how old he is, but we do know that he was so little that he couldn't properly, that they had other people drawing for him, because he couldn't. So he was probably 2 maybe. Anyway, someone gave him a handful of pebbles. Mrs. Hutchinson at this point starts crying. She's saying, "This isn't fair, this isn't fair," and the town stones her. The story ends on the line, "It isn't fair, it isn't right," Mrs. Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. So, it's a really fun story to read when you're 13 years old at 8 in the morning. I remember when I was in 8th grade, no one in my class saw that twist coming. And our teacher was so thrilled to throw that twist on us. But that being said, we were 8th graders, so we weren't necessarily the best when it comes to critical thinking yet. And that's part of why this story is introduced to you, to show you what a story is when there's going to be some sort of twist ending, how the suspension and dread, how it builds, where it's going. It's a really good story for introducing younger readers to this type of trope. But that being said, this story also absolutely freaked out all the adults who read it when it was first released, it's pretty, like, I don't know. I feel like this is a bit overtalked, but this was originally published in the New Yorker, and apparently a lot of people canceled their subscriptions after reading this story because they were so horrified and so upset by the ending. So clearly, this story has it hits you. There is an impact when you are finished reading. And I want to say right now, when I was talking about, her characters feel kind of one-dimensional, I would argue that a lot of her stories have that quality to them. I don't think every single one. I'm pretty sure, like, I don't think Hangsaman, We've Always Lived in the Castle, or perhaps The Haunting of Hill House. I don't think they use this. Or The Bird's Nest. Those characters feel very fleshed out. But in a lot of her short stories, I would argue that her characters feel like, as I said, paper dolls, not people. And I do not mean this as an insult. I think this works so well when she's doing it. She actually wrote, among all of her horror and her suspense, which is what she's best known for, she wrote a domestic memoir, which was about raising her children, called Life Among the Savages. And it's a much more whimsical, lighthearted story. It's a really fun read. And when she's writing that, she's writing about her children, and yet she gives her children this sort of paper doll treatment. She writes, Lori is a small-town mare, inadequately informed and positive. Janie is a game mistress with a bright voice. Sally is a vague, stern old lady watching the world with remote disapproval. And Barry is an intrepid foot soldier following unquestioningly and doggedly. And I love that description because it doesn't tell you anything specific or personal about the children. Like, we don't know very specifically, like, what the children, who's afraid of what, whose favorite food is what do they like to do in their spare time. So it stays impersonal, and yet at the same time, it is jam-packed with letting you know exactly who you are dealing with. In 4 short sentences, you feel like you've been introduced to your character by their role, how they function, and basically what their essence is. And that is also what's happening in The Lottery. You kind of get a sense of what their role is, not who they are. There's this intertwine between the plot and the characters. It's not that the characters drive the plot, it's that the plot drives the characters. And in The Lottery, there's absolutely no shortage of characters. Pretty sure there's I stopped counting after 10. There's a lot of characters that you keep meeting after every paragraph. And plenty of these characters are given lots of dialogue. But at the same time, you don't actually get to know anyone. You don't get to go into their heads. You don't get to see what they're thinking or what they're feeling. We know that there's the village boys and the boys are kind of rambunctious, and the girls gather around, sitting in the grass calmly. We know there's, that standard old man who's waving his fist, damn kids, get off my lawn, very change-resistant and misanthropic. Mr. Summers, as I said, he's kind of the leader, and we get this, he has a round face, he's a jovial man, and he runs the coal business, and people feel sorry for him because he has no children and his wife's a scold. But even that, we don't get further than that. We don't know what his life is. We don't, other than, coal business, mean wife. We don't know what his goals are, except seeing the lottery go through. And even then, it doesn't feel like this is a character whose whole life revolves around it, but we're not getting to see what his whole life is. We only see him in this one little snippet. And when it comes to writing, typically there's a strategy where the author or the writer gives the character a goal. And this goal is something they need or want to achieve by the end of the story. And that creates the suspense for the reader who wants to see the goal completed. You see that a lot, and you see that in books and movies and TV shows. There is something that a character needs or wants. Either they don't have it already, or they need to maintain it because the security of it is threatened. And the suspense is that the reader wants to make sure that they get or don't get what they're looking for. But in The Lottery, no one has a predefined want. The only goal that we really are clear on in the end is that Mrs. Hutchinson doesn't want to die, which that's a given at that point. Yeah, we get that, but we know like that's not her only life goal. She probably did she have other things? Did she have dreams? Did she want to be a singer? Like who knows? We don't get to know anything, and we don't even know that she doesn't want to die until the last couple of pages. So throw that out. Basically, as I was saying earlier when I was saying there's that interline between the narrative and the characters, in this story, the character's desire is the plot. You know, see the lottery through. That's the plot of the story. So therefore, they don't influence the plot. They are part of the plot. They have their roles, they have their functions, and that is the plot of the story. The most dynamic character then is honestly the narrator, because the narrator is the puppeteer. He's the one who leads us through watching all these characters act out their lottery. And when I say that, I want to clarify the lottery does not have an unknown narrator. The narrator is third person. It's not like some person who's like, hey, you don't know who I am, but let me tell you about this crazy thing over here. Like, it's not like that. It's a third person omniscient narrator. And we'll all remember from school, third person omniscient. It's an objective third person who kind of sees everything, does not use I, me, or my, and can tell you everything that's going on and follows through everyone. So you could argue that part of why the story works so well is because of the third person narrator. The third person narrator sees everything and takes you through everything, but also cannot get into the characters' heads. Therefore, internal motivation just goes out the window. Like, maybe, it's 100% likely that all the characters are thinking about what the lottery is and thinking about what's going to happen that day. And they're thinking like, I want to win. Who wants to win? I don't want to win. I don't want my friend to win. I want this lady that I hate to win. Who knows what they're thinking? But if you got to know what they were thinking, you would know what the twist is, because you would know like what the result of the lottery is. Because you don't know, you're going in assuming this is a lottery. Like, this is a lottery. What's a lottery? It's you win something. You want to win a lottery. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than winning the lottery, but you still buy your lotto tickets. Like, it's a good way of withholding what's going on without blatantly withholding what's going on. If you got to be in a character's head, there are writers who would have still showing you what's going on with the character's head and giving you more snippets of what they're thinking. Or maybe they would have been more clear about not wanting to win, but not telling you why they don't want to win. And that would have been the question lingering with you. Why don't you want to win? But I think that would have honestly cheapened the plot quite a bit, because it really does come from the fact that you came in with this preconceived notion of what the lottery is, and thus you just get completely floored by what the story actually was about. So, yeah, in short, if you're not privy to the internal emotions, then you're not going to be clued into what's actually happening. And you do get these surface level hints as to what's going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to put it together as you're reading. For instance, I remember the first time I read it, there was one line where Mrs. Hutchinson's, I think she's a 12-year-old daughter, Nancy, she makes her draw. And there's a whisper in the crowd of another girl saying, I hope it's not Nancy. And looking back, you can see that as, oh, I don't want Nancy to die. I don't want my friend to die. But also, when you read that, you could have also registered that very easily as jealousy. Like, another 12-year-old girl doesn't want to see this 12-year-old girl get what she doesn't have. So, you have your own excuses for what's going on, and you're just so blind to what is about to happen. And that is what helps hold on to the suspense. I guess the only thing that then questions is, why do you still have a sense of suspense as you are reading the story? And that one is a bit harder for me to answer, but my latest theory that I'm working towards is the fact that, besides the fact that every sentence Shirley Jackson writes is a gift to writing sentences, because she is a machine when it comes to writing, I would say that the fact that the story is so idyllic and so picturesque, that there is something odd about it. At the very least, when you're reading a story, you are very aware that stories need conflict, that there is going to be some sort of issue or tension that is going to arise, or perhaps that there is something bubbling under the surface. And when she's writing this story, she makes sure that this story is picture perfect, idyllic cottagecore before cottagecore was an aesthetic bliss. It opens with the line, "The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely and the grass was richly green." As I said, she was describing the school. It's the end of the school year and the kids are still talking about school a little bit while they're playing. Fathers gathered to discuss planting and rain, tractors, taxes, and it's this very calm, soothing scene. So you kind of are already feeling like, okay, wait, what's going to happen then? Because where's the story going with this? There needs to be conflict. So maybe you can think there's something sinister lurking beneath the bliss. Perhaps you're thinking something's going to crush it. Maybe something's going to get in the way of the lottery. Who knows? Maybe someone, like, you don't know what's going on. That's what's so confusing, because you're working towards a lottery and you already think a lottery is something good. So I guess, perhaps you're just confused about what's going on. And that's kind of like what's helping cause the suspense. But honestly, I kind of wished I had a more clear answer, because I don't know. The best answer I can come up with is the fact that it's the third person narrator, and that the third person narrator is just very effective at hiding what's really going on and keeping you in this, like, watching these paper dolls move around their little perfect town, and you just wondering, okay, well, where are we going with this? What is going to happen? And yet you're still floored, because through everything you weren't quite expecting everyone to turn and stone a woman to death. So it's interesting, because I would argue that Shirley Jackson is one of the best writers I've ever read. And yet I don't know if it's possible to emulate what she writes. She's not an understated writer. Like, I would say Ernest Hemingway is an understated writer. He very rarely puts in emotion, like emotional instructions, that he often just kind of lays it out for you, his iceberg theory, just lay it out and there's everything lurking under the surface. But I don't know, there's a degree of that to Shirley Jackson, that there's so much lurking under the surface. But she also does give emotion to it. She gives emotional instructions. She gives these very blissful, dreamy images. And I think that at times makes it feel almost like like stage directions, like you're watching this little play unfold. I know I keep going back to the play simile metaphor, but the play comparison. But I think it really works. There is something about her writing style that doesn't want to exist in the real world and wants to exist in this fantastical world. So, and I still don't know how to emulate it. I feel like anyone who tries to emulate it, it would just come off feeling very, like, amateurish, and somehow, perhaps because she's very distinct and vivid and very precise about where she chooses to give hints, where she chooses to not give hints, how she chooses to dolge out information, the moments she chooses to dole out information. It's an absolute art. So I know that I didn't give anyone anything particularly helpful with writing a paper, because I know that you're just gonna, because I know that my main conclusion to this is that, this can't be emulated. Jackson's one of a kind. But hopefully I've given you something to think about, or at the very least, you've got some agreements. Maybe you agree with me. Maybe you don't agree with me. I don't know. But you clicked on a video about Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery. I don't know why you did that. So I assume you did it for help writing a paper. So sorry if I'm not helpful. I hope I was helpful. And I'll try to make another video soon, maybe in a year from now. Bye.